Dr. Rathod, postfeminism is often seen as a response to the successes and failures of second-wave feminism. Can you explain how this concept emerged?
Certainly, postfeminism arose in the late 1980s and early 1990s as a cultural reaction to feminism, suggesting that many of its goals had been achieved. This was a time when media narratives claimed that feminism had made women unhappy, offering a critique of the movement's earlier phases.
It's intriguing how postfeminism intersects with other intellectual movements like postmodernism. How does this intersection shape its approach to feminism?
Postfeminism does indeed engage with postmodernism and poststructuralism, questioning traditional feminist frameworks. It advocates for a pluralistic approach, emphasizing individual choice over collective action, which aligns with neoliberal values. For example, while feminism might push for systemic changes, postfeminism often focuses on personal empowerment within existing structures.
However, isn't there a risk that focusing on individualism could undermine broader feminist goals?
Absolutely, that's a valid concern. Critics argue that this individualistic focus often leaves behind marginalized groups, primarily representing the experiences of white, middle-class women. This shift from collective to individualistic pursuits can indeed dilute the broader feminist political goals.
Let's delve deeper into the shift from collective action to individualism. How does this transition manifest in postfeminism?
In postfeminism, there's a marked focus on personal freedom and agency, reflecting neoliberal capitalist ideals. This is evident in media portrayals where women are presented as empowered consumers making individual choices, rather than activists pushing for systemic change. An anecdotal example would be the portrayal of women in advertisements as independent buyers rather than community leaders.
This focus on individualism, though, could it potentially exclude broader social justice aspects?
Indeed, it does. By prioritizing individual success, postfeminism sometimes neglects the collective struggles against systemic inequalities. The emphasis on personal empowerment can overshadow the need for solidarity with other marginalized communities.
What forward-looking insights can we glean from this individualism-collectivism debate?
A forward-looking approach might involve integrating individual empowerment with collective action. We could envision a feminism that values personal agency while still advocating for systemic changes, ensuring that diverse voices are included in the movement.
Cultural representation is a significant aspect of postfeminism. How do media portrayals reflect post-feminist ideals?
Media often depicts women as empowered individuals who find agency through consumerism. This represents a shift from traditional depictions that objectify women to those that celebrate their purchasing power and lifestyle choices. For instance, think of TV shows that focus on women achieving personal success through beauty and fashion.
But could these portrayals be considered superficial or even counterproductive?
Certainly, that's a counterargument to consider. While these portrayals suggest progress, they can be criticized for being superficial, focusing on consumerism rather than substantive empowerment. Such depictions may inadvertently reinforce stereotypes rather than challenge them.
How might future media representations balance empowerment with genuine feminist ideals?
Looking forward, media could strive to represent women in multidimensional roles, emphasizing both personal success and community leadership. By doing so, they can highlight empowerment while still advocating for broader feminist goals.
Finally, let's discuss postfeminism's relationship with other movements. How does it align or diverge from them?
Postfeminism intersects with movements like postcolonialism and postmodernism by challenging established norms and promoting a diverse range of feminist voices. However, it's often critiqued for not adequately representing marginalized groups, focusing more on the experiences of the privileged.
Is there a way to reconcile postfeminism with these broader movements?
A forward-looking insight would be fostering dialogues across different feminist and social justice groups. By building coalitions and recognizing shared goals, postfeminism can evolve into a more inclusive movement that truly reflects the diversity of women's experiences globally.
Postfeminism offers a fresh perspective on womanhood, emphasizing choice and individualism. Dr. Rathod, How does this differ from traditional feminism's collective approach?
Postfeminism shifts focus to personal empowerment, allowing women to define themselves through consumer culture. Unlike traditional feminism, which stresses solidarity, this approach sees personal freedom as key.
But does this emphasis on personal choice undermine collective feminist goals? Some argue it aligns too closely with capitalist ideals.
That's a valid concern. Critics argue that by aligning with neoliberal values, postfeminism often overlooks systemic barriers that women face, focusing instead on individual success stories.
Could you share an example of how this plays out in real life? In workplaces, postfeminism emphasizes individual agency over structural change. Women are seen as empowered to navigate their careers, but this can obscure systemic inequalities.
So, in essence, career setbacks are often attributed to personal choices rather than institutional barriers.
Exactly. For instance, choosing part-time work is framed as a personal preference, ignoring the lack of support for women's career advancement.
Does this perspective resist systemic solutions like quotas or affirmative action?
Yes, postfeminism often views such measures as unnecessary, promoting self-improvement instead. Yet, this can hinder efforts to address deeper organizational issues.
Looking ahead, how can workplaces balance individual empowerment with the need for systemic change?
Media plays a pivotal role in shaping post-feminist ideologies. Dr. Rathod, how does media representation reinforce these values?
Media frequently portrays women as empowered and independent, emphasizing personal choice. However, it often depoliticizes feminism, suggesting gender equality is already achieved.
Yet, isn't there a risk of media reinforcing traditional roles under the guise of empowerment?
Absolutely. While promoting independence, media often highlights traditional roles like the importance of beauty or romantic relationships, thereby reinforcing existing stereotypes.
How can media evolve to better support genuine feminist progress? The future of feminism may lie in integrating post-feminist values of individualism with traditional feminist goals for systemic change. This balanced approach could redefine gender equality efforts.
Do you see a growing recognition among young feminists of the need for this integration?
Yes, younger generations are increasingly advocating for both personal empowerment and systemic change. They recognize the limitations of viewing these as mutually exclusive.
As we move forward, fostering dialogue between different feminist perspectives seems crucial. Thank you, Dr. Rathod, for sharing your insights on this evolving discourse.
Angela Carter is often celebrated for her feminist and postmodernist writings, but Dr. Rathod, how does her work reflect post-feminist themes?
Carter's stories like The Bloody Chamber challenge gender norms through subversion and complexity, key elements of postfeminism. Her characters resist binary gender roles, embodying a blend of feminine power and autonomy.
Yet, some argue her portrayal of femininity in surreal settings might dilute feminist messages. Does her use of magical realism complicate feminist discourse?
Indeed, the fantastical elements blur reality, allowing for reinterpretation of femininity. While it may appear to undermine feminist clarity, it opens space for exploring diverse, non-traditional forms of female identity.
Looking forward, how might Carter's approach influence modern post-feminist literature?
Her blending of genres encourages contemporary writers to embrace ambiguity and complexity, fostering narratives where female agency is nuanced and multifaceted, reflecting today's diverse feminist realities.
Margaret Atwood is a cornerstone in feminist literature, yet her works incorporate post-feminist elements. Dr. Rathod, could you elaborate on this duality?
Atwood's novels like The Edible Woman depict women not only as victims but as complex individuals capable of perpetuating power dynamics, aligning with post-feminist critiques of simplistic narratives.
Critics say her open-ended narratives might leave readers without clear feminist solutions. How does this ambiguity serve post-feminist discourse?
Ambiguity in Atwood's work reflects the real-world complexity of women's experiences, challenging the notion of one-size-fits-all feminist solutions and illustrating the diverse paths to autonomy.
How might Atwood's intersectional approach influence future feminist and post-feminist works?
By highlighting intersectional and post-colonial perspectives, Atwood's work paves the way for more inclusive narratives that consider multiple axes of identity, crucial for evolving feminist discourse.
Both Carter and Atwood challenge binary gender constructs in their work. Dr. Rathod, how do these literary techniques reflect post-feminist ideologies?
Their characters often defy fixed roles, blurring lines between victim and perpetrator. This mirrors post-feminist critiques that question binary categories and advocate for nuanced portrayals of gender.
Some argue this complexity can obscure clear feminist messaging. How does this tension play out in their narratives?
While complexity can muddy messages, it allows for a richer exploration of gender, reflecting the reality that identity is multifaceted and often contradictory, a core tenet of post-feminism.
What future trends do you foresee in literary approaches to gender?
I anticipate a continued embrace of complexity, with narratives increasingly reflecting the fluidity of gender and identity, challenging traditional binaries and offering richer, more inclusive stories.
As we examine the impact of Carter and Atwood, Dr. Rathod, what do you see as the future of post-feminism in literature?
Post-feminism will likely continue evolving, embracing technological narratives and global perspectives, reflecting the interconnectedness of modern gender experiences.
Could emerging writers face challenges in balancing feminist and post-feminist themes?
Absolutely. Writers must navigate the delicate balance of honoring feminist legacies while pushing boundaries, ensuring stories resonate with contemporary audiences seeking authenticity and diversity.
In this evolving landscape, how can post-feminist literature continue to resonate with wider audiences?
By addressing universal themes through specific cultural lenses, post-feminist literature can engage diverse readers, fostering empathy and understanding across different experiences and identities.
Naomi Wolf's work, particularly The Beauty Myth, often intersects with post-feminist themes. Dr. Rathod, could you elaborate on how her ideas contribute to this discourse?
Certainly, Wolf critiques societal beauty standards, highlighting how they restrict women. However, she also promotes individual empowerment, a hallmark of post-feminism. For example, her power feminism contrasts with victim feminism, advocating for personal agency over perceived victimhood.
That's intriguing. Yet, some criticize post-feminism for undercutting collective feminist efforts. How does Wolf's stance fit into this debate?
While Wolf emphasizes individual transformation, critics argue this focus can overshadow systemic issues. They contend that prioritizing personal over collective action may dilute feminist goals, a point of contention within post-feminist criticism.
Looking ahead, how might Wolf's perspectives shape future feminist dialogues?
As society increasingly values individual narratives, Wolf's ideas could spark new discussions on balancing personal empowerment with collective activism, potentially reshaping feminist strategies.
Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie is known for her reformist feminism. Dr. Rathod, how does her approach differ from post-feminist ideologies?
Adichie's work emphasizes reform within existing systems. Unlike post-feminism, which may suggest feminism's goals have been met, she advocates ongoing activism. Her stories spotlight systemic inequalities, urging changes within patriarchal structures.
However, some elements of her narratives seem to empower individual agency. Could this be seen as aligning with post-feminist thought?
While she champions individual empowerment, Adichie frames it within a collective struggle against discrimination. This diverges from post-feminism's consumerist leanings, rooting her work in broader sociopolitical contexts rather than individualism.
How might Adichie's focus on global and post-colonial issues influence future feminist movements?
Her emphasis on diverse narratives could lead to more inclusive feminist dialogues, integrating global perspectives and challenging Western-centric feminist frameworks.
Angela McRobbie argues that postfeminism co-opts feminist language while reinforcing traditional norms. Dr. Rathod, can you unpack this critique?
McRobbie highlights how postfeminism, under the guise of empowerment, often promotes consumer culture. This is evident in media that emphasize appearance and success, subtly binding women to outdated feminine ideals.
Some might argue these portrayals offer visibility and choice. What are the pitfalls of this perspective?
While visibility can be empowering, McRobbie argues it's often superficial. The so-called new sexual contract promises agency but within a patriarchal framework, limiting genuine feminist progress by masking inequalities.
What insights does McRobbie provide for advancing feminist objectives in this environment?
She advocates for critical engagement with media and cultural narratives, urging feminists to reclaim discourse from consumerist influences and focus on systemic change and solidarity.
Given these diverse perspectives, Dr. Rathod, what do you foresee as future directions for feminist and post-feminist thought?
I anticipate a synthesis of ideas where individual empowerment coexists with collective activism. The challenge will be to harness media's reach without succumbing to consumerist traps. This could redefine feminism's role in social justice.
Indeed, balancing these elements seems crucial. How can emerging feminist voices shape this evolution?
By incorporating intersectional and global perspectives, new voices can broaden the feminist agenda, addressing diverse concerns while fostering unity. This approach could invigorate movements, making them more relevant across contexts. Technology, especially social media, offers unprecedented platforms for activism. It can democratize voices but also risks amplifying superficial narratives. The key will be using it to facilitate genuine dialogue and action.
Dr. Rathod, Angela McRobbie's post-feminist masquerade suggests a performance that seems empowering but subtly reinforces patriarchy. Could you unpack this concept for us?
Certainly, the masquerade is a stylized femininity that appears to empower but ultimately reasserts patriarchal norms by promoting a hyperfeminine identity. It's like a theatrical act where the script favors tradition under the guise of modernity.
So it seems to offer freedom while binding women to certain roles. How does this balance play out in everyday life, say, through consumer culture?
In consumer culture, fashion and beauty are portrayed as empowerment tools, yet the reality is more complex. Women often find themselves locked in a cycle of consumption that dictates adherence to traditional beauty standards, reminiscent of a gilded cage.
This facade of empowerment sounds problematic. Could there be a counterargument that some women genuinely feel empowered by these choices?
Absolutely. Some argue that choosing one's appearance is a form of personal empowerment. However, McRobbie warns that this focus on individual success through consumption detracts from collective feminist goals, much like celebrating the fruit without nurturing the tree.
Let's delve into racial dynamics. McRobbie's work highlights how the post-feminist masquerade centers on white femininity. How does this impact representation?
The masquerade often excludes non-white femininities, reinforcing white cultural dominance. It's akin to a stage where only certain characters are cast as protagonists, leaving others sidelined or misrepresented.
But isn't there a risk of stereotyping when non-white women are represented?
Yes, non-white femininities are often reduced to stereotypes such as the exotic global girl. This commodification turns cultural diversity into a consumable difference, akin to seeing the world through a distorted lens.
Could neoliberal individualism be exacerbating these issues by focusing on personal choice?
Precisely, it obscures systemic racism, expecting non-white women to conform to white-centric norms for visibility. This individualism erases collective struggles, much like a soloist overshadowing an orchestra.
Dr. Rathod, how does the performance of femininity in this masquerade embody modern roles like the fashionista or working girl?
These roles, while offering agency, paradoxically reinforce patriarchal norms. It's like a dance where every step is choreographed to maintain a traditional rhythm under a modern guise.
Can you give an example of how this paradox manifests in real life?
Certainly, a fashionista might feel liberated by her choices, yet her empowerment is often contingent on adhering to consumer-driven standards, similar to a puppet bound by strings.
Are there arguments suggesting this performance offers genuine freedom?
Some believe it provides freedom of expression. However, McRobbie argues that this perceived agency is a mirage limiting genuine feminist action, much like a bird in a cage believing it can fly.
Finally, how does maintaining this masquerade affect women's mental health and identity?
The pressure to conform can lead to issues like depression or anxiety. It's similar to wearing a mask that's beautiful but suffocating, affecting one's mental well-being. Gender melancholia arises from the tension between empowerment and oppression. Women are compelled to perform femininity that feels both liberating and constricting, much like a moth drawn to a flame.
Looking ahead, how can we dismantle these challenging norms?
To move forward, integrating intersectional critiques is crucial. We must amplify diverse voices and challenge these norms collectively, akin to weaving a tapestry that celebrates all threads of identity.
Angela McRobbie has been vocal about how post-feminism is portrayed in media, claiming it undermines past feminist achievements. Can you elaborate on this, Dr. Rathod?
Certainly, McRobbie critiques shows like Sex and the City for illustrating a world where feminism's goals are achieved, yet these portrayals often reinforce patriarchal norms. It's like showing a polished surface while ignoring cracks beneath.
That's intriguing. But how does McRobbie address the criticism that feminism sometimes overreaches? Some argue that post-feminism just reflects today's realities.
She acknowledges that post-feminism uses feminist rhetoric to appear progressive. However, it masks a double entanglement, where feminist ideals are co-opted to reinforce existing hierarchies, much like wearing a disguise that hides true intentions.
In that case, what future steps does McRobbie suggest for feminist movements to counteract these portrayals?
She advocates for renewed activism that challenges media narratives, emphasizing diverse voices, especially those marginalized by mainstream post-feminist depictions. It's about reclaiming the narrative to reflect true feminist values.
Dr. Rathod, McRobbie speaks of the post-feminist masquerade as a performance of femininity. How does this concept impact women's identities?
The masquerade promotes hyperfemininity, encouraging women to adopt identities that seem empowering but actually reinforce old gender roles. It's like an elaborate dance where freedom is limited by invisible strings.
Interesting metaphor. Some might argue that adopting such identities is a personal choice, an expression of agency. How does McRobbie counter this viewpoint?
She argues that these choices are shaped by societal expectations, not true autonomy. The new sexual contract offers empowerment only if traditional norms are upheld, like a contract with hidden clauses.
How might future feminist discourse address this masquerade and promote genuine empowerment?
Future discourse should focus on dismantling these superficial contracts and encouraging identities that resist conforming to narrow definitions. It's about broadening the canvas for how femininity is expressed.
Let's delve into neoliberalism's influence on post-feminism. Dr. Rathod, how does McRobbie link these ideologies?
McRobbie posits that post-feminism aligns with neoliberal values by prioritizing individual success over collective change. It's like promoting a race where everyone starts at different lines.
Some argue that this individualistic approach reflects modern values. Is there a downside to this perspective?
Certainly, it dilutes feminist goals by focusing on personal gains rather than systemic issues. This shift can obscure the need for structural change, like mistaking leaves for the whole tree.
How can future feminist strategies reconcile these values with a need for collective action?
By fostering community-driven initiatives that spotlight structural inequality, future strategies could balance personal empowerment with collective responsibility, creating a more equitable landscape.
Dr. Rathod, McRobbie critiques postfeminism for its exclusionary practices. How does this manifest in representations of femininity?
Postfeminism often centers on white femininity, marginalizing non-white experiences. It's akin to a spotlight that illuminates only a fraction of a diverse stage, leaving others in shadow.
Supporters might say postfeminism is inclusive. How does McRobbie address this contradiction? What future actions could be taken to ensure postfeminism embraces intersectionality?
Future efforts should amplify diverse voices and experiences, integrating them into the core feminist narrative. It's about weaving a richer, more inclusive tapestry of empowerment and equality.
Amelia Jones argues that post-feminist texts often reduce second-wave feminism to a monolithic narrative. Dr. Rathod, could you elaborate on how this simplification impacts the perception of feminist history?
Certainly, by portraying second-wave feminism as a single, overly critical entity, post-feminist texts risk distorting its diverse nature. For instance, think of it like viewing a rich tapestry through a narrow lens, missing the intricate, colorful threads that make it whole.
That makes sense, but some argue that simplification helps in engaging broader audiences. How does Jones address this viewpoint?
Jones acknowledges that simplification can attract wider attention, yet she warns it dilutes feminist ideals. She compares it to a brand logo, easily recognizable but stripped of its depth and meaning. This risks losing the core messages of feminism.
A compelling analogy. Moving forward, how might Jones's critique influence future feminist discourses?
Jones's critique encourages a multifaceted approach, urging scholars to acknowledge complexity in feminist movements. This could lead to a more nuanced understanding, akin to appreciating the full spectrum of hues in a painting rather than just the primary colors.
Rosalind Gill describes postfeminism as a sensibility rather than a coherent movement. Can you explain what she means by this, Dr. Rathod?
Gill sees postfeminism as a cultural ethos, a pattern reflecting contemporary attitudes towards gender. It's like a complex tapestry woven with choice, empowerment, and consumerism. These elements coexist, often in contradiction, influencing how gender is perceived and acted upon.
It's interesting how these themes are intertwined. However, critics suggest that this sensibility reinforces traditional norms. How does Gill respond to such critiques?
Gill agrees that postfeminism can inadvertently reinforce patriarchal norms by emphasizing individual choice over collective action. It's a double-edged sword. While promoting empowerment, it subtly aligns with neoliberal values which can undermine feminist solidarity.
Looking ahead, how might Gill's insights shape our understanding of gender in media culture?
Her framework could inspire a shift towards more critical media discourses, challenging the superficial empowerment narratives. By unpacking these layers, we can foster a media culture that genuinely supports gender equality, rather like peeling an onion to reveal its core.
Elaine J. Hall and Marnie Salupo Rodriguez challenge the notion that post-feminism marks an era of achieved feminist goals. Dr. Rathod, how do they argue against this perspective?
They argue that the belief in post-feminism's achievement of feminist goals is a myth. By dissecting public opinion data, they demonstrate that gender inequalities persist. It's as if calling a marathon complete when only halfway through, the finish line is still distant.
Their critique seems robust, yet some may argue that post-feminism reflects genuine progress. How do Hall and Rodriguez address this optimism?
They acknowledge progress but caution against complacency. The myth of mission accomplished can stall further action. It's akin to resting on laurels. While progress is visible, continued effort is crucial to tackling remaining challenges.
Considering their critique, what future directions do they propose for feminist activism?
They advocate for renewed feminist solidarity and collective action. By confronting the post-feminist myth, activists can forge a path towards genuine gender equality, like charting a new course on a map that truly reflects the terrain.
Amelia Jones highlights the commodification of feminism within post-feminist culture. Dr. Rathod, how does this process affect the feminist movement?
Commodification turns feminist ideals into marketable items. Feminism becomes a fashion trend rather than a social movement. It's comparable to turning activism into a catchy slogan on a t-shirt, losing depth and urgency in the process. Jones suggests a vigilant commitment to the original goals of feminism. By consciously differentiating between genuine activism and commodified versions, activists can maintain the movement's integrity, like preserving an ancient text amidst modern reinterpretations.